Assalamualaikum everyone, मेरा नाम है Nitasha and I'm the host of शाम की चाय, जहाँ पे हम बहुत ही कूल पाकिस्तानियों की कहानियाँ आपके सामने लेकर आते हैं। आज हमारे शो के गेस्ट है हाशिम अली। अस्सलामुअलैकुम हाशिम।
Assalamualaikum. How
Welcome
are
to the show.
you? I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you. We're cold, but we're good.
Yes.
We're very excited to have you. Hashim, you are a storyteller. You are a art director. You are a production designer. You are the creative brains behind the Pasuri music video. The visuals were beautiful in that. So congratulations on a wonderful, wonderful success. We have you on the show because, you know, this season we're going to be focusing on the 1947 partition, India और पाकिस्तान का जो था. और आप जो हैं pre-partition walking tours करते हैं लाहौर के, आपने architecture को study किया है और मैं चाहती हूँ कि हम साथ में जो time गुजारें हैं, हम पाकिस्तान की शुरुआत को, हम partition को एक architecture lens से देखें. So before we get into all of those details, I first want to understand what drove your interest in pre-partition architecture.
I think the idea wasn't pre-partition architecture. It was just the concept of identity, who we are as Pakistanis, what we were, because so my dad was a diplomat and we were living out of Pakistan, and so when you have a lot of diplomat के बच्चे इकट्ठे पढ़ रहे होते थे स्कूल में, so हर एक की अपनी एक say होती थी चीज़ों पे. मुझे ना one thing that used to really hit me was that, you know, I had a Indian in my class and a Bangladeshi as well, and both of them had amazing stories to tell about their countries.
Okay.
And most of them sounded like stories from my country. Most of them sound like things that I'd heard or felt. The food was similar, and I was like, but then who am I? Like, why are we different? And are we different?
Yeah.
And then architecture के ऊपर ये हुआ that because you see architecture says a lot. It's a home. जिस तरह एक logo होता है ना किसी company का, architecture is a person's logo. It's their home. It's it's who they want to live there, right?
Right.
And before you had all these fancy architects and before you had all of that, people used to really spend time on the home. They used to really spend time on the buildings that they're creating. Even when you look at the Mughals, we look at you know, for example, the Taj Mahal, and we think of a certain thing.
Yes.
But उसमें भी बहुत सारी बातें हैं जो वो कह रहे हैं through just architecture.
Right.
कि maybe it's the scale saying that how great I am as a king.
Right.
Or how, you know, a certain motif would mean something else. Little things that they're leaving somewhere.
Right.
तो वो पूरी चीज़ें, it was almost like through these architectural almost marvels, and I don't mean stuff like the Taj Mahal or the Lahore Fort or these big things, but even like small buildings, these odd details that have been put there on simple houses.
Okay.
And most of them serve a function.
Right.
And most of them I was just curious about that. Why do they exist and why is it here and why don't we do them anymore?
Okay.
You know, where did this thing happen where we shifted from an architecture that suited our environment to an architecture that's essentially for Scandinavia?
Yeah.
You know, so like where did we move from all of this? So it was just these questions I had, and I think it also came from a production designer's lens, where I want to recreate things, and so when you recreate something, you read up on it, you understand the concepts behind it, and then, you know, so it just kind of all merged together. So I never really intentionally wanted to, it just happened.
It just happened. Okay, so you said earlier कि आपने buildings में ये छोटी-छोटी चीजें notice की. तो can you tell us a little bit about sort of like a historical building? What are the elements? What ये छोटी-छोटी चीजें क्या हैं जिसको हम भी फिर eventually notice करते हैं?
So you see, it's such a vast topic, right? Because design, essentially the difference between design and art, one of the major reasons is that design serves a purpose.
Okay.
So if you're holding this cup, it has this little handle for a reason.
Yes.
You know, it is made from a material because मैंने गर्म चीज़ हाथ में पकड़नी है.
Right.
So that's design.
Yes.
The chair I'm sitting on, if it's not comfortable, it's a bad design, no matter how beautiful it looks.
Right.
So a lot of things come from culture.
Okay.
The culture of that time, because culture essentially changes with time.
Yes.
So, you know, so we talk about a home.
Yeah.
For example, आपके जिस तरह a lot of pre-partition homes especially, and a lot of homes later on post-partition as well, had a central courtyard.
Okay, yeah.
So उसका concept जो था वो ये था that when you're building a house around a central courtyard, it's community building.
Yes.
You know, so everybody who lives in the house will come out in the evening, sit,
Yep.
have a Shaam Ki Chai.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
and you know they will sit there, and then आपको सारे कमरे नजर आ रहे होंगे.
सही.
So it's a private and public
Public.
kind of a space.
Right.
Secondly, घर साथ साथ जुड़ जुड़ के बने हुए
सही.
हैं. So when you're making the houses like this, कि वो
जी.
साथ साथ जुड़ के बने हुए हैं, and you उस टाइम पे ये bylaws वाला सिस्टम नहीं था जिस तरह अब होता है. Bylaws
अच्छा.
basically according to a certain community or a certain town, you have to have like a gully on the side or the back, और
Okay,
वो
ठीक
इतने
है.
हो space covered इतना हो. उस टाइम पे ये नहीं थी चीजें. So
सही
people
है.
used to use the maximum space given to them.
Okay.
So अब मैं अगर घर पूरा साइडों से कर रहा हूँ, so where do I open my windows? So I
Right.
open them towards the courtyard. So
Right.
the idea of a patio, जिसको हम अब बोलते हैं
जी,
घर में
जी.
छोटा सा,
जी.
that was the same. जहाँ पे लोगों की
अच्छा.
खिड़कियाँ खुलती थी कमरों की towards the outer courtyard.
Okay.
और वहाँ पे सेंट्रली में देखता है. And this is very common in South Asian architecture. So आपको
सही.
साउथ इंडिया में बहुत ज़्यादा ये नज़र आता है. आपको
Right.
श्रीलंका में ये बहुत ज़्यादा नज़र आता है.
Okay.
So that became a functional thing जो आपकी चल रही.
Right.
Then again, certain buildings pre-partition में झरोका जिसको हम बोलते हैं, which is like this window kind of a thing
Okay.
with lots of जाली नज़र आती है आपको.
अच्छा.
With like a lotus thing, and उसमें the idea for that came from पर्दा.
Oh, okay.
So जाली जो होती है, not
जी.
the normal जाली जो हमें नजर आती है, but
सही
the
है.
really decorative
Yes.
जाली.
Yes.
उसका concept ये है कि अगर मैं पीछे बैठा हुआ उसके,
जी.
I can look outside,
Right.
but बाहर से मैं अंदर नहीं देख
अंदर
सकता.
नहीं देख
So
सकता,
it's a basic concept of पर्दा.
Oh,
So a lot of
wow.
the time evening में if my घर की औरत जो है या
जी.
जो भी है उसने अगर balcony में आके बैठना है, तो बाहर busy street है.
Right.
So बाहर से लोग उसको नहीं देख सकते, but she can look outside.
outside.
You know?
That's
So the little elements that you add to that.
Right.
जिस तरह अक्सर आप जाएं लाहौर फोर्ट में जाते हैं हम या
जी.
पुरानी बिल्डिंग्स में जाते हैं तो it's very inconvenient because छतें कमरे दरवाजे बहुत छोटे होते हैं, you
जी,
know.
yep.
So सर लगता है आपका, windows बहुत छोटी होती हैं.
Right.
And you know now the difference is we have big windows.
Yes.
The 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 idea was that this is a hot climate, you know. Even at that time, temperature 45 degrees तक जाते होंगे, you know.
बिल्कुल.
ठीक है अब 2-3 डिग्रीज बढ़ गया होगा, but
जी.
45 degrees तक जा रहे हैं. And it's
It's
you know at
still
that
a
time
lot,
जब
yeah.
आपके air conditions नहीं हैं, you know,
Yeah.
you don't have all of that. So छोटी खिड़की से क्या होता है, तो कम लाइट आएगी, so
Oh, interesting.
गर्म नहीं होगा कमरा.
सही है.
ऊंची छतें होंगी कमरों की पर दरवाजे छोटे होंगे. ऊंची
ठीक है.
छत because hot air
Right.
goes up
Yes.
and cold air comes
Comes
down.
down,
So
yeah.
जब गर्मी होगी तो ऑटोमेटिकली
वो ऊपर.
ऊपर चली जाएगी and
Right.
छत इतनी ऊंची है कि वो ऊपर ही रहेगी, वो नीचे वापस नहीं
Oh,
आएगी. और जो
interesting.
कोल्ड होगी वो नीचे आ जाएगी.
सही है.
You know, so it's almost like a circular thing that you're creating.
Yeah.
And उसके बाद आपको जो दरवाजा छोटा होना या खिड़की छोटी होने से it also creates forced air pressure.
Oh,
कि
okay.
बाहर आपकी हवा अगर हल्की भी चल रही है तो अंदर ब्रीज चलेगी. Because वो प्रेशर के थ्रू अंदर से गुजरेगी ना.
Okay. Okay.
बट ये जो बड़ी खिड़की है जिसको मैं स्कैंडिनेवियन आर्किटेक्चर
जी.
बोल रहा हूँ,
Floor to
because
ceiling. Everyone wants a
exactly
floor to
like
ceiling
आपकी
window.
जब बड़ी बड़ी आती हैं तो आपके घर अभी भी बनते हैं that you know you have this really modern house
Yeah.
and people having this big floor to ceiling windows and then जब घर में वो shift होते हैं with great modern looking furniture
Yeah.
not from this area at all and
Yeah.
suddenly अंदर आके they'll put like chick you know वो chick लग जाएगी खिड़की के ऊपर और वो blinds लग जाएंगे because it's a hot area.
Yes.
Those windows are made for climates like where you're from
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
know
Exactly.
ठंड है,
ठंड है.
सूरज नहीं निकलता इतने इतने दिन तो
Yes.
जितना भी निकलेगा वो एयर ट्रैप करेगा,
आएगा.
वो सॉरी हीट ट्रैप करेगा.
Right.
So you know, so these kind of elements that come with architecture, which slowly as we lost our identity, we also lost everything in our
All of that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. So as Pakistan ki, well, you say we lost our identity, but as it shaped into whatever it is, how did the architecture change?
So I'm not 100% sure about this, and usually my dates are completely off. But अगर मैं वैसे basically आपको बताऊं तो what happened was that you know you had the Mughals, and after that you had the Sikh Empire, and then you had the British Empire, and ये जब सब चल रहा था तो it's basically the problem with this entire region is that the people who are from here have always been colonized.
Right.
Either they were the Mughals or
Right.
before them there were some other ones. Before them there were the Aryans. कितना होता रहा, वो shift होता रहा, change होता रहा, but it was never a full-on genocide. You know, they weren't removed and completely killed, but they adapted.
Yes.
You know, so इतनी सारी हमारी depth में जो सारी चीजें थी,
जी.
वो with time हमने जब as Pakistanis we weren't Indians. You
Same,
know?
yeah.
So हम Indians नहीं थे. So
हम
what we did
पाकिस्तानी हैं.
was the entire history was of India.
अच्छा.
And we said, oh, let's just look at the Mughals because they were Musliman.
Yeah.
And let's just look at Muhammad bin Qasim.
Yes.
And let's forget everybody in between.
Yeah.
And let's just stick to all the Muslim people.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this thing that we constantly talk about colonization, and yes, we were colonized, but
Yeah.
we also kind of removed our identity ourselves.
Yeah.
And we had this great marvel of the Mughals, and we had these beautiful buildings by the Maurya and the Gupta dynasties, and we
Right.
had these, Delhi Sultanate and whatnot, and the Sikh Empire and everything.
Yeah.
It was Sara khatam kar. Then the Britishers came and they created their architecture, which
Yes.
was Saracenic architecture.
Right.
We're like, who are we now? Like, what do
Yeah.
we do that's essentially Pakistani?
Yeah.
So in the 50s and 60s, we start seeing these really odd buildings,
Okay.
Jisme, because cement is there now, and we're looking at architecture of the world, and we're creating buildings which kind of go with the outside world, but
Yeah.
has nothing to do with us.
Us.
So a lot of this kind of like a terrazzo kind of walls started happening. A lot of flat architecture with like protruding
Right.
kind of arches started happening.
yeah.
Like extensive jali work, because we were used to, because we are maximalist, we are not
Yeah.
minimalist.
Oh, yeah, we do not
And
do
we
things
should,
low
yes,
key,
and
yeah.
we should be very proud of it.
Yeah, of
We
course.
are one of those really few nations in the world who had architecture and design that was so maximalist that a Western person could never understand that. And they
Yes.
had to steal it from us to
Yeah,
understand that.
they
you know?
did, they did,
And
yeah.
how two completely contrasting color can work together.
Yeah.
So we were maximalist, and that maximalism somehow translated to these gray and almost like dead-looking buildings, but all of them with this oddities. Like there's stuff in Karachi even where you have this cement work happening with like elephants on them, but wo
Right.
elephant cement mein banaya to kuch
Yeah.
aur lag rahe.
Yeah.
And all the gates and everything we see with those stars, and
Yes, yes.
buildings pe stars aa gaye, and
Yeah.
then you're doing like multiple color terrazzo.
Yes.
So all the 50s started doing that.
Yeah.
And then some of the architects, and I think it was the 70s, who turned around and said, no, but what is us?
Right.
Who are we? How are we rejecting material and materiality that is ours?
That is ours, yeah.
So you had people like Kamil Khan Mumtaz, and you had people like Nayyar Ali Dada, who basically, I think he designed this house as well, I'm not sure.
Oh, really? Oh,
But
wonderful,
they
yeah.
started working with the local material and the local artisans, and they said, let's create architecture which pays homage to who we are
Yes.
and who we were, but at
Yes.
the same time is different. So
Yeah.
we grow from that.
Yeah.
So even to this day, there are like Kamil Khan Mumtaz is an insanely talented architect, because he would employ people and their families, by the way, so fresco painters, and their families
Oh,
who worked
wow.
since Akbar's time, and
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating, and they taught it to their children, and they taught it to their children, and they painted the Wazir Khan Mosque, and they painted so many other things, and the same families are being employed by him to create fresco work, which works for the current time period as well.
Oh,
And
that's
then you
interesting.
have, people who used to do ainakari, which is basically mirror work.
Yeah.
Something that the world marvels at when they look at South Asia.
Oh,
and,
yes.
And there are hardly like 2-3 people left who do that now.
So that's very interesting. I remember going to so I've been to Pakistan a lot. I've been to Sheesh Mahal. I've seen it growing up, and then I go to Paris and we go to Versailles, and it's like, oh, the Hall of Mirrors, the Hall of Mirrors, right? And we go, and I'm like, ye to kuch nahi hai.
It's literally a hall of mirrors.
It's literally a hall of floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Isme kya hai,
Yeah.
right? Like you go to a place like Sheesh Mahal and you see those tiny, 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 tiny little mirror
Yeah.
work from the floor to the ceiling. That's a hall of mirrors. This looks like restoration hardware.
Yeah, because
It's uninteresting.
again, that was something which was literally stealing stuff from here and there.
Exactly.
We were kind of doing that as well, but really
Yeah.
smartly.
Yeah.
As Mughals. But the idea of the Sheesh Mahal, you know the story, right?
Tell me.
So the story is like I think we were always really dramatic, and I
Of
love
course
that.
we were.
So Shah Jahan's wife,
Yeah.
Mumtaz Mahal, really problematic woman who was really like, thought really highly of herself, and
Sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
And she basically said to him that, how much do you love me?
Okay.
And he's like, a lot. And
Yeah.
he's like, do you love me enough to bring stars for me?
Uh-huh.
And he's like, yes.
Okay.
Ab usne वादा तो कर लिया, but now he's like, how am I going to make that
How am I
happen?
going to do this? Yeah.
So he got that entire Sheesh Mahal, which was actually like a private quarter for her.
Yeah.
He made it in this ainakari work, which is
Okay.
small pieces of mirror. So
Yes.
at night, when you turn a candle on, it looks like stars on earth. So it's a love story, and the
That's
entire
beautiful.
floor is of sange badal, which is like the texture of clouds. So it's almost
Yes.
like you're walking in clouds as you're looking at the stars.
That's beautiful.
So so again, came from a
Yeah.
how do you design something from functionality that
Yes.
came through, and imagine the kind of हमारा mind कैसे चलता है?
बिल्कुल.
That we had these facilities and people who used to do that, because before the Britishers, we were actually creating some of the finest artworks, creating some of the finest pieces in jewelry, and not just these things, but like food.
Yes.
And the Britishers kind of sanctioned us
Yes.
and said that, whatever you are creating, we used to export it to England first, and from England we used to import it back, paying a duty on top of it.
That's wild.
Because we couldn't sell it ourselves. So that's how slowly a nation, and I mean Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, and the entire thing, nations that were like in trillions there, unka jo ek GDP tha, it just
Bilkul.
went down to a point where most of the people had no money and
That's
had to
wild.
turn to farming and agriculture and God knows what else, because it was serving the purpose to a Britishers, and it affected the way that we started seeing homes, and we started seeing architecture, we started
course.
seeing things, but we lost it on the way.
Yeah.
And we lost it so badly that we have been unable to kind of grasp
Get it back. Tell me about your favorite building in Lahore.
So very recently, I rediscovered the tomb of Noor Jahan, and very few people, whenever we say Noor Jahan, the first person that comes to your mind is the singer.
The singer, yes.
So it's not her.
Yes.
It's the empress who was
Okay.
married to Jahangir. Jahangir is basically Shah Jahan's father,
Okay.
the Mumtaz Mahal guy. And Jahangir is also Shahzada Salim, the one who fell in love with Anarkali.
Yes.
Allegedly. And he basically, so Noor Jahan was his last wife, and she was his favorite wife. And she basically, they had the beautiful love story.
Right.
And she was not just a co-queen, she was a co-emperor.
Okay.
So Jahangir was into opium, and he was into alcohol, and he was like a full-on guy,
Many
and he was
things.
really sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was the one who was actually running the entire empire,
Of
and a
course
lot
she
of people
was.
hated her for that. And
Okay.
she's actually उस time पर पूरी दुनिया में, there were just जो famous दो लोग नजर आपको आते हैं. One
जी.
was Queen Elizabeth I, the
ठीक है.
famous one,
Right.
and then you have Emperor Noor Jahan.
That's
Because
wild.
she was the one, तो जब East India Company से भी आया, so there's a guy
जी.
who wrote his journal में
Yeah.
कि there is this empress यहाँ पर, how is she allowed to kind of make decisions.
Right.
She even famously went on an elephant to save Jahangir because he was kidnapped.
That's
she was like
wild. Yeah,
she was
she's
a
a
badass,
yeah, badass,
empress,
yeah,
So
yeah.
her tomb is here, and I just love it because of the story behind it.
Right.
So you have this beautiful tomb of Jahangir,
Right.
which she made, by the way, after he died.
wow.
And then opposite it is
Yes.
her brother's tomb, who's
Okay.
Asif Jahan, who's Mumtaz Mahal's brother.
Okay.
And isi enclave mein, they were
Yes.
supposed to have Noor Jahan's tomb. But
ठीक है.
obviously after Jahangir died,
Yes.
she was shunned
Right.
and because of the
Of
jo bhi
course,
bacche
yeah,
and whatnot. So she made her own tomb when she was alive, and the tomb is a spitting image of Jahangir's tomb, and it's just smaller. And उस पूरे tomb के अंदर there are poppy flowers.
Yeah.
Because he used to do opium, so it's her
Okay.
last love
Poppy seeds.
thing for him.
Yeah.
And on her tomb, she said that on her tombstones, she said that I'm just a lowly servant, and मेरे tomb के ऊपर ना कोई मौत जलेगा, like as in कि कोई दिया नहीं जलाएगा आके.
सही है.
मेरे tomb पे कोई बुलबुल नहीं बोलेगी और ना कोई butterfly उड़ के जाएगी, because nobody would want to visit me because I'll be forgotten. And that's literally what has happened, that it just went on the side, it became
Yeah.
part of a forest, nobody knew it existed.
Right.
उसकी बेटी उसके साथ दफन है.
अच्छा.
And architecturally it's so beautiful, but it's in ruins now and completely broken, and that's what we do to history and to
Of course we
women
do.
in our history, and you know.
Yeah.
So my new favorite building in the entire Lahore is that, because I want to see it being redone and that story retold.
Absolutely.
So we're doing a tour of that as well,
That's incredible.
where we show all Jahangir's
Yeah.
tomb and Asif Jahan, and then we go to Noor Jahan, crossing, like literally आप पटरी
Yeah.
पे से cross करके जाते
Yeah.
हो, and then एक गंदी सी गली में गुजरते हो, and then suddenly the tomb comes, and you're like, we saw these magnificent tombs, and this
Yeah.
woman
Yeah.
was something, उसका tomb कहाँ पे रह गया?
Who built those tombs
Yeah,
is now. That's
exactly.
wild. Now I have to go see it. I had no idea कि ये था भी and
Yeah.
like the whole story behind
And when
it.
you go
That's
there, take a flower so that she knows.
I will, of course. Of course, I'll
Someone
bring a poppy.
remembers.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Inshallah, मैं फिर से आऊँगी एक और episode के साथ. Until then, Allah Hafiz.